Welcome back to this course on self-knowledge. In today's lecture, we're going to explore the topic Exotericism, Pseudo-Esotericism, and Esotericism. Together, we'll learn how to distinguish between different belief systems, philosophical movements, and spiritual traditions, so that we can begin to recognize which forms of knowledge truly have the power to transform us at a deeper, more transcendent level. Whenever we begin to feel spiritual concerns, when we start asking those deep, unanswered questions that stir within us, or when we feel a longing to connect with something greater than ourselves, we soon realize that there are countless teachings, theories, religions, and dogmas out there, all claiming to guide us toward divine understanding and higher realities. That's why the purpose of today's lecture is to help us learn how to tell the difference between them, to recognize what defines a pseudo-esoteric school and how it differs from a truly esoteric one. It will also help us reflect on where we currently stand in our own spiritual journey and understand when the real experience of esoteric work actually begins. Let's begin then by talking about the first type of knowledge, exotericism. So what is exotericism? It refers to external knowledge, information we acquire from the outside world. All throughout our lives, we're exposed to this kind of knowledge. We receive it in school from an early age, from our parents and relatives, from the media, at the university, on the internet, through various courses we take, and from the books we read. In short, exotericism is everything we learn from outside ourselves. External knowledge is always received through the personality. Our personality is that part of us that develops as we grow. It's how we present ourselves to the world, shaped by our individual tastes and interests. Because of this, external knowledge doesn't reach our consciousness directly. It's actually our personality, and specifically our intellect, that absorbs and is nourished by this kind of knowledge. And as we grow, the types of knowledge we're drawn to will depend on the preferences and inclinations of our personality. For instance, many of us found our way to this course because we were drawn to topics like astral projection, meditation, spirituality, and so on. That interest led us to search through the vast array of information now available on these subjects, especially with how abundant it is in today's media. But within all that overwhelming variety, it's not easy to find pure knowledge, the kind that offers clear, practical guidance capable of truly helping us progress in our inner work. And that's why, in the midst of so much information, discovering pure knowledge is a real privilege. Out of 1,000 who seek it, only one may truly find it. Not everyone succeeds in finding pure knowledge. Many end up caught in teachings or schools that ultimately don't lead to true inner transformation. In fact, because of karma, there are some who, due to their past actions, have no right to receive pure knowledge in this life. They may have received it in past lives but rejected it or misused it, and so now, even if they cross paths with it, they either don't recognize its value or simply walk right past it. But there's something important we need to understand. Even when someone does encounter this knowledge, they still receive it as exoteric knowledge. All of this course on self-knowledge, at first, is exoteric because we're receiving it from the outside, and it's the personality that takes it in. And if we don't apply it in practice, then it remains just another theory, just another beautiful idea that may sound perfectly logical, but never becomes real within us. That's why, in the Conference on Fanaticism and Mythomania, we explained that when someone receives the knowledge of the three factors, two distinct paths open up before them. The first is the path of the believer. This is the path followed by those who receive the teachings but treat them as just more information. They choose to believe in them because the ideas resonate with them, because they seem logical, inspiring, or simply interesting. But they don't go further. They don't make the effort to apply what they've learned in real practice, so they never verify the teachings for themselves. The believer simply accumulates knowledge. They devote themselves to believing and absorbing information from people who seem wise, spiritual, or close to the divine. If the believer is an intellectual, they might read a large number of books, compare opinions, cite many authors, and speak eloquently and with sophistication on the subject. But in the end, because they do not practice, they do not verify, none of what they believe in becomes a lived reality. The second is the path of practice. This is the path taken by those who are not satisfied with just believing. They receive the knowledge and they put it into practice. They use the tools that are taught and seek personal verification through experience. They hear about astral projection, and they don't stop at theory. They practice until they have the experience for themselves. They learn about psychological death, and they understand that belief alone won't bring real change. So they begin the work of observing and transforming themselves. And little by little, they begin to notice changes in their thoughts, emotions, and actions. Even in the astral dimension, they start to witness the inner transformations brought about by this work. They learn about reflective meditation, then set time aside to practice it regularly. And through that effort, they begin to gain deep personal insights. They discover the possibility of negotiating karma and apply it. Through practice, they verify that it truly works. They learn about spiritual birth and take that path seriously. They cultivate chastity, ignite the sacred fire, receive the sword, begin to accumulate energy in the spinal column, and eventually undergo the initiations of the major mysteries. Thanks to this dedication, the one who practices enters what is called the mesoteric stage. They begin to truly live the path. This mesoteric level serves as the bridge that leads to esotericism. But the reality is, very few choose the path of practice. In fact, out of 1,000 who encounter pure knowledge, only one truly follows it, through direct experience and practice. Now let's turn our attention to pseudo-esotericism. True esotericism means inner knowledge, so pseudo-esotericism is false inner knowledge. It's something that appears to be inner knowledge, but in reality it's not. This false inner knowledge is found in the countless theories and belief systems around the world. Religions, sects, philosophies, spiritual figures, pastors, ministers, and schools that claim they can guide us to divinity or lead us to liberation. Many of them promise that by following their teachings, we'll attain salvation or reach union with the divine. Today, there are over 5,000 religions in the world, not to mention the many sects, and nearly all of them have something in common. They each claim to be the only path to truth, while declaring that all others are wrong. Faced with so many unverified theories, people often fall into a state of confusion. That's why many simply choose to follow the religion of their parents or those closest to them, to avoid the complexity of having to sort through the overwhelming number of religions and spiritual teachings out there. Eventually, they convince themselves that through faith alone they will find salvation. But in truth, most of these schools, sects, and religions are caught up in a competition, fighting over who can gather the most followers, who can win the most souls. It's become a kind of spiritual marketplace, a merchandising of souls, and none of it truly leads a person to deep inner connection with God. However, when we decide to break free from these conditioned beliefs, when we begin to investigate these movements, sects, and religions in the internal worlds, we discover a powerful truth. None of them can truly take us to real inner knowledge. They lead instead to belief, to emotional attachment, and to fanaticism. It's easy to see that humanity today is caught between two extremes. On one side, people are deeply immersed in materialism, obsessed with luxury, money, prestige, travel, cars, possessions, high-paying jobs, and fame. Yet at the same time, they are also immersed in psychism. That is a kind of false spirituality, where nearly everyone is either part of or searching for a spiritual movement, sect, religion, or mystical philosophy. And what we often see is a blend of both extremes. People attend places of worship, pray to the divinity they believe in, or join spiritual groups. But why? Mostly to ask for material things, or to learn how to use spiritual teachings to attract wealth and abundance. Because of this, the pseudo-esoteric schools that gain the most popularity today are those that promise prosperity and material success to their followers. And by doing so, they energetically bind people to these teachings, not for their liberation, but to benefit from them. That's why it's so important to learn how to recognize a pseudo-esoteric school, so we don't end up entangled in one and lose our direction on the path towards self-knowledge, the awakening of consciousness, and ultimately, final liberation. There are many different types of pseudo-esoteric schools, but we'll see that they all tend to share certain characteristics. By becoming aware of these signs, we can begin to discern whether the school we belong to, or are thinking of joining, is truly esoteric or just another pseudo-esoteric path. Let's now look at some of the key characteristics that can help us identify a pseudo-esoteric school. First, they charge for knowledge, and they do this either directly or indirectly. Some pressure their members to give offerings or pay tithes regularly. Others impose mandatory monthly fees. In many cases, esotericism becomes linked to the sale of items like perfumes, oils, talismans, candles, books, potions, minerals, robes, and more. And in this way, they deceive many, convincing people that by purchasing or using these things, they are securing their salvation or making inner progress. Another sign of a pseudo-esoteric school is that they do not teach the 3 factors for the revolution of consciousness. They don't offer the precise practices necessary for the awakening of consciousness. They fail to teach how to achieve spiritual birth through white tantrism, or what we could call suprasex. Instead, they fall into the domain of black tantrism because they don't teach the importance of chastity, nor do they show people how to value and wisely use their sexual energy. They don't guide couples to unite consciously with a stable partner of the opposite sex, working to raise the sexual energy up the spine toward the higher centers, without ever reaching orgasm or ejaculation. In fact, many pseudo-esoteric schools endorse fornication through marriage, giving people permission to misuse their sexual energy. Some even promote celibacy or the rejection of sexuality altogether, believing this will bring them closer to divinity. Others simply ignore the topic, placing no real emphasis on the sacredness of sex. But they all share a common failure. They do not teach people about the profound, transformative power of sexual energy, nor how its wise use is essential for awakening consciousness and achieving real inner change. Pseudo-esoteric schools also fail to teach how to truly die psychologically. They don't show how to free the consciousness through psychological death. Instead, they promote various distracting techniques that may sound spiritual, but do not lead to any real, lasting transformation. Some even teach that our sins will be forgiven simply by believing, praying, or attending rituals, without ever addressing the need to uproot the ego, the true source of our inner darkness. They also do not teach how to pay our karmic debts. They don't explain that through conscious sacrifice for humanity, we can earn the merits needed to stop paying for past mistakes through suffering. They never mention that karma can be paid off entirely within a single lifetime, nor do they teach that karma can be negotiated or how to negotiate it consciously. Instead, they repeat the old phrase, "All roads lead to Rome," and with this false idea, they confuse people, making them believe that it doesn't really matter who or what they follow, that as long as they believe and stay loyal to a certain faith, they'll be saved. Pseudo-esoteric schools are mostly driven by intellectualism, but not by direct practice that leads to real verification. They often suggest, or outright claim, that esoteric knowledge can be acquired just by reading books. Their teachings are often confusing. They may sound profound or mysterious, even ineffable, but ultimately they lead nowhere. They present many ideas, but these become mere distractions, entertainment for the mind, keeping people busy, yet far from discovering the truth within themselves. These schools also tend to foster fanaticism and mythomania in their followers. They manipulate through fear, and they feed mystical pride. Another characteristic of pseudo-esoteric schools is that they mix forces. They often combine elements of higher spiritual teachings with negative forces and entities. And whenever forces are mixed, the original pure force is lost, while a third, distorted force is created, one that becomes destructive. This makes true inner advancement impossible and binds people even more strongly to their beliefs. Many of these schools promote practices linked to the Black Lodge, offering methods to awaken powers and psychic faculties but without eliminating the ego. They teach the use of candles, cards, crystals, and pendulums. They delve into parapsychology, spiritualism, mediumship, witchcraft, and the manipulation of elemental forces. Some dedicate themselves to healing practices, but they do so without permission from divine law. We must remember, Every illness is a karmic consequence, a debt being paid through pain. To heal someone without the consent of divine justice is to violate the law. And that violation creates more karma, both for the person being healed and for the one performing the healing. Even more concerning is that the beings granting these healing powers are not divine beings. They are negative entities. And when someone heals using the power of those entities, they create a link, an energetic bond. From that moment forward, the entity has the right to demand energy from that person, again and again, as repayment for the favor. This is why it's so important to investigate these things directly, through conscious experiences in the astral plane, so you can clearly perceive and verify these realities for yourself. One of the most defining traits of a pseudo-esoteric school is that it does not teach the need to seek self-realization. Nor does it emphasize that this goal must be achieved within a single lifetime. As a result, people are deprived of the opportunity to understand and fulfill the true purpose of their existence. This causes us little by little to lose faith in our own inner being, and instead we begin placing our trust in external elements. Negative entities and black magicians take advantage of this. They establish all kinds of pseudo-esoteric schools with the purpose of diverting souls from the path. They also distort spiritual teachings, because the truth is, nearly all religions and philosophical systems originally contained pure inner knowledge. But over time, especially with the degeneration of humanity, those teachings began to decay. And when we investigate these schools in the internal worlds, we discover how their original principles have been corrupted. In fact, most are now led by black magicians, beings who outwardly appear radiant and ineffable, but who, when examined on the astral plane, reveal their true nature. Each of us has the responsibility to investigate these things internally, to see beyond appearances and confirm the truth with our own consciousness. The fundamental difference between a white magician and a black magician lies in the quality of their knowledge. That's why we have a responsibility to be reflective, conscious, and alert. Above all, we must investigate within the internal worlds. Ask your inner being to show you, in the astral plane, the true nature of anyone you're receiving teachings from, and verify every teaching you receive, including this one, because when we read the writings of a black magician, even if we're unaware of it, we are invoking them. Now let's take a moment to clarify, what do we really mean by esotericism? Esotericism is inner knowledge. It is occult knowledge. It is the wisdom of our own inner being, a knowledge we begin to receive as we strip away the layers of egoic conditioning, as we progress in the creation of our internal bodies, and as we apply the techniques of verification we are learning through inner investigation and direct experience. Inner knowledge is always received in the internal worlds, and it is always received by our consciousness. Esoteric knowledge is meant for consciousness. It cannot be found in any external place, not in the physical world, not in a manual, not in books, and not in any external school. What we can find in the physical world are the guidelines and the techniques, the tools that point us toward that inner wisdom. But the knowledge itself only comes when we apply those tools, when we practice sincerely, and when we open ourselves to that inexhaustible source of truth that lives within us. True esotericism is about knowing ourselves, and through that self-knowledge, achieving the intimate self-realization of our being. All the mental and spiritual development we gain as we deepen our inner knowledge is what allows us to free ourselves, awaken our consciousness, and serve others, so they too may have the opportunity to awaken and seek their own self-realization. Esoteric knowledge can only be reached through the three factors of the revolution of consciousness. These are the only three objective works we must fulfill: psychological death, spiritual birth, and conscious sacrifice for humanity. As we liberate our consciousness through psychological death, each spark currently trapped within the ego is released and receives the inner knowledge it is meant to receive, according to its own unique vocation. As we build our inner bodies, we gain access to the wisdom of the various dimensions of nature. And the more we strive to share the knowledge we acquire, the more our own inner knowledge grows. For whoever gives light, light increases for them. and whoever shares wisdom receives wisdom in return. In the internal worlds, we will receive a great deal of knowledge. However, much of that information is deeply personal, meant solely for us, and must not be shared with anyone. This is especially true for insights related to our inner progress, initiations, and anything that pertains directly to our inner being. When esoteric knowledge is received in the form of a closed book, it is meant exclusively for our being. Such knowledge must not be revealed in the external world, and we must learn to keep silent about it. But if the knowledge is received internally as an open book, then it may be shared with our students. Each being holds its own unique knowledge, and as our consciousness awakens and aligns with the harmony of nature, we gradually recover the wisdom we once possessed long ago. Let's remember, only the one who, upon receiving the knowledge of the three factors, chooses the path of practical work is the one who enters the mesoteric stage that leads to true esotericism. The one who practices verifies the three factors through direct experience and applies the different techniques learned. He advances through the initiations of the major mysteries until completing the first mountain of initiation. When the second mountain begins is when he already lends hope for esoteric knowledge. And only after passing through the process of resurrection, having eliminated all psychological defects, does he enter the esoteric school of his ray as an adept. Then, on the third mountain, when he manages to integrate the three primary forces of his being into one and achieves complete fusion with his inner father, he becomes a true esotericist. It is at this stage that he reaches the first level of universal wisdom. As we can see, reaching enlightenment, or true inner knowledge, requires serious and dedicated effort. To become a real esotericist is not a matter of theory, but of deep inner work. Yet, most students make a common mistake. They begin to feel like esotericists simply because they've started listening to these teachings. They feel initiated without ever having practiced suprasex. They feel holy without having eliminated even a single psychological defect. They feel practical without ever having truly practiced. All of this is due to the false sensations created by the self. That's why we must avoid falling into self-deception, and instead devote ourselves with discipline and sincerity to the path of real practice. Let us remember, as our consciousness awakens and we come into harmony with nature, the wisdom we once possessed is gradually returned to us. That brings us to the end of today's lecture. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section. And now I'd like to invite you to the next topic, where we'll explore the world of relationships. In that lecture, we'll learn how to improve our various relationships. Our relationship with the physical body, with others, with the planet, and most importantly, with our inner being, so we can move toward genuine happiness. Don't miss this powerful and practical topic. Until next time.